Wanted to thank everybody for your interest in this topic today. It is a direct outgrowth of the situation that I faced in August 2020 when I began to think about how I was going to provide services to my schools and meet their requirements and meet their needs. It also directly reflects what we knew about COVID at that time. What we knew about transmission is a little today than we did then, so it completely reflects that. And for that reason, I asked Elizabeth if we could just take a picture of our group today and understand what settings we are currently serving in, if we're seeing students in person, or if we're seeing them remotely. So she's placing the poll up, and if you would kindly take a moment to do some voting, we'll get a snapshot of where our audience is today.
Excuse me, I have to say the submit button isn't working.
You may need to scroll down the entirety of the survey and then hit submit.
And I'm seeing some great numbers here, Elizabeth. So when you think we're at a good point.
The results are shared.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. So I'm seeing we have sort of a nice mix, more people in face-to-face, and many people providing in-person services, and that's great. So the material that I'm going to share is maybe most timely for someone who's returning to from remote services to in-person services, but it's really my hope that everyone will have a nugget and a takeaway from today. So this is how I use remote technology in the speech room to physical distance and provide speech therapy in a paperless manner. I use it remotely, I use it in person and hybrid, and I'll let you be the judge if you think it's engaging. So as Elizabeth said, the demonstration I have for you is a little bit wonky, and I'll explain that as we move on. So Elizabeth said I'm a speech therapist with the Allegheny Intermediate Unit. When I first joined, I served preschoolers and then joined the school age division. I've provided services in our special education school where we serve students with multiple disabilities and complex needs, as well as in a public school, charter school. I have served students there, but I'm currently providing services to students in our non-public schools area. So my assignment for the 2021 school year is an itinerant caseload serving 4 schools. And back in August, I needed to think about what those schools were asking and needing from me. So in 2 of my schools, I was asked to be present physically in the school, but to deliver services according to the parent choice, be that in person, remote, or the parent's version of hybrid. And in a 3rd school, I was asked to be physically remote. The school is small and the school wanted to control the people that were entering and exiting. So they asked all related services to be at a remote location. They would bring the students to us, as well as there are some students who are actually at their homes at that school. And the 4th school in my caseload was pretty traditional. They returned to in-person services and would be remote only on an as-needed basis. So these are the mandates and the challenges that I was faced in August of 2020. Many, I'm sure, as you were as well. There was a mandate for students and teachers to be masked, a mandate for 6 feet or greater distance between the students and the instructor. And this was an amazing job done by our teachers and our custodians to space out students, and a lot of furniture ended up in a lot of unique places in order for this to happen. There was a mandate that students could not be grouped together or mixed between different classrooms. This means I couldn't take a speech student from 2 different second grades. They were going to remain in a pod and lunch together, recess together, and special teachers were going to move from room to room for the students. A personal challenge was that there was to be no sharing of student supplies. So no crayons, no game pieces, no dice between students. My thinking challenge was, how would I disinfect paper materials and workbooks that I was using? Because again, we knew a somewhat different situation about COVID virus transmission than we do now. And of course, the overarching challenge was, how would I see and hear the students, particularly my articulation students, for placement and production if they were going to be masked? And conversely, how would I demonstrate cues, placement, production if I were masked? So for a short period of time, I did use a mask with the clear panel here. I personally found it to fog up and not be as comfortable, so that was not a solution that worked for me. Additionally, my screen flipped on me quickly, but before I could even get to this is how I do it, I was completely overwhelmed as to how was I ever going to do it. And I'm sure many of you felt the same way. So in addition to those broad COVID challenges, I had some assignment specific challenges as well. My speech room was not 6 feet to space adequately. It was a very small room in several locations. I was also asked to meet an administrative directive to schedule as though all my students were in brick and mortar so that we could have a seamless re-entry going back and forth between remote instruction and in-person instruction if necessary. And this happened to me a lot, and perhaps it did too for you and your students, but I had students who were in person and then the family would decide that they wanted to quarantine to visit a loved one. So they stayed at home for 10 days, went to remote instruction. And then if I was fortunate, they stayed at home for another 10 days upon their return to finish a quarantine. I was asked to schedule to avoid teacher large group streaming times. So in my schools, when there was a large number of remote students and in-person students, the teacher did not always have those students remain in online completely with the in-person students all day. So I was asked to avoid those times when she was teaching to both sets of students, as well as the regular avoidances that we do, like avoid core and specials and learning support services. And then I was asked to schedule and lesson plan to shift between these in-person and remote sessions because they were going to be happening throughout the day for students as well as the students who shifted their choice from week to week. I was wondering, how am I going to lesson plan to limit the use of materials in those manipulatives because I would not have time to disinfect those between different sessions. I do disinfect the area where the student is between sessions, but not bingo chips and not dice. And so overall, how to do all this ethically and according to best practices. So I felt much like this individual did. And again, no doubt you all felt very similarly. So immediately it was obvious that the traditional speech room setup and therapy that I was accustomed to using was not going to work for me. I had to think flexibly. I had to come up with some alternatives. I had to think about being safe and continuing to be high quality and engaging. So because I was remote with all students that one day a week, I began to ponder, how could remote technology or telepractice help me solve my other challenges in my in-person settings? And so I did refer to the ASH's site on Telepractice. It's a robust site that has best practice guidance for you on types of telepractice, roles and responsibilities. There is even some state-specific guidance pages. But there was some information about selecting the client and considering who was appropriate for telepractice. And there was this one sentence there that made me gave me some pause for thought. And it was that telepractice may be the only service delivery model option available and offered to ensure the continuity of service at all times. So it made me feel a little bit better about the thoughts that I had brewing about what I was about to try with technology. There were some specifics about environmental considerations if you were going to do telepractice in terms of the environment. Would you, your selection of lighting and your selection of furniture and how to, best optimize it so your video teleconference would be as good as possible. And so that made me think, could I flip the speech classroom? So instead of ensuring that the environment, like the room and the lighting, was going to be set up to be conducive to the technology, could I exploit the technology to enable a better physical environment to solve my challenges? And so that is actually what ended up happening. For my speech room being too small to distance 6 feet or greater, I was able to place the student in the doorway away from me or across a room behind a clear barrier. I then also used a teleconference session to move my screen from my laptop to an iPad placed near the student. And I shared my materials digitally, my pictures, my activities, and my boom cards. And then this helped me solve the no sharing of materials between students and cleaning those materials after each. With respect to the problem of visualizing students and therapists' faces, my school did allow some brief masking breaks if we were appropriately distanced. So that allowed me to have the student remove their mask to do some assessments or to check for placement, even though those sometimes sound correct behind the mask, but we all know that they're not placed correct behind the mask. So I was able to use those mask breaks, but also now that we had this technology going between the two of us, I was able to use the camera to highlight my cues and prompts. So for this challenge of lesson planning for multiple frameworks, I found some efficiency by using the same materials for both the in-person sessions and the remote sessions. And I did that by organizing them all digitally on my desktop. And that enabled me then to accommodate both in-person students and even a remote student. So they were safely distanced and accomplish both types of sessions. So this is how it looked in my settings. So the step one is to fix your technology to do so. So this is me on one side of my area, distanced 6 feet from my student on the other side. My iPad is positioned in front of the student. And fortunately, I'm issued one of the large iPads, so that makes the viewing of the materials quite nice. It's not the small or the mini iPad. Then you need a internet connection between the devices and a teleconferencing platform. I use Zoom, but you could use Google Meet to do this. Now, alternatively, if you did not want to use a teleconferencing platform, you could physically connect your device to another PC or to a smart board and treat it like a clone environment to broadcast your materials from your device to an alternate device located near your student. You would lose some annotation features from your teleconferencing platform, but that could be an alternative. So this is what it looks like in my locations. This is one of my sites, and here I am positioned on this side of the room with my student positioned here and my iPad in this location. And frankly, right here, there are desks and bookshelves and filing cabinets, and there is not an effective 6 feet distance left to right here. So this is the opposite view, what my student would see. And I sometimes do place the device right on the desk there for the student, but I do have some movers and shakers. It's not always a safe environment for the device. And here you'll actually see sometimes my students were seated in the hallway. And that was because sometimes they got cold due to a lot of the extra ventilation we were using throughout the school. And they wanted to sit right next to this little heater. In my second location, I do not have the picture of my speech room. It is in the basement, subterranean, very high windows, very poor ventilation, not quite 8 feet. It would have been a little tight, but I was not permitted to run a fan in the room because of COVID. So I was invited to use this room that was not in use for the year because students were not moving, and I was very grateful for it. Unfortunately, I was not permitted to use the smart board technology. So once again, I am positioned across from students, and my iPad is positioned here. The next step, or here are some helpful tools that are available to make this happen. This is a great little iPad stand. What's great about it is that it can stop at any angle, so you can best position your devices for seeing your student and they for seeing your materials. My classes were using these desk shields, and I was asked to use them in some of my schools as well. So the next step was to set up my materials on my desktop. I moved worksheets and workbooks and open-ended games and as many things as I could move digitally, language materials, my visuals, and we all have a manner in which we feel comfortable filing and organizing, but what worked for me was to set up items according to articulation and by sound. My visuals were in a folder, and I tend to do a lot of thematic type lessons, so I organize my language materials by month or season, as well as some generic organization like expressive, receptive, and vocabulary. And this is just an example of some of the items that are behind those folders. So how do we get digital materials, or how did I go about this? So I've mentioned that I use Boom Learning materials, and probably most of you are familiar with Boom Learning, but if you are not, it is a digital platform that teachers can either create materials or purchase other teachers' materials that allow students to work individually on an interactive activity. I use only the free version, but if you use a purchased one, you can assign to your classroom and actually collect data on how they're doing on the task. So I was able to use some Boom materials, of course, Teacher Pay Teachers materials. And I was fortunate that I had some manuals that actually had the disc in them, and I was able to load that disc onto my laptop and have access to those manuals there. But what about your favorite stuff? We all have that one page in a workbook that is what we need to work on in SH context if we're in articulation. We all have that favorite stuff. So this little app on my phone was a godsend. Excuse me. What it allows you is to take a photo of a page, easily converts it to a PDF, and allows you to send it to yourself. So I ended up using that quite a bit. This particular app even allows you to bundle several pages at a time. The other thing I do a lot is convert a static PDF into a PowerPoint, or you could use a Google slide to be more interactive. And I used the snipping tool to do that. And I'd hope to show you that. I may be a little limited in what I can share about how I do that, but I'll try to explain it. It's important that I speak about fair use at this point. It is not safe to assume that what you are snipping or copying is automatically fair use for educational purposes, even if you own that material. You should follow the 4 factors of fair use to determine that for yourself. And this is a great website that has videos and questionnaires to guide you in that process. In fact, today, as you review the handout that's available, I'm able to show you some more things because we're presenting this in a closed, safe environment. So you'll see in my handouts, I've actually blocked out some of the images that I felt were more copyright protected. As I said, I use Boom cards, only the free version. I organized those also. You can create folders to sort them. But one thing I wanted to share with you is this great website. There's a blogger by the name of Melissa. Her site is the Speech Therapy Store. Somehow she's used a program where she's searched the internet and she's found in this post 917 free Boom cards that are speech therapy oriented. Now, they may not be a complete package of sounds. It may be a particular snippet like, just K sound, but she has them beautifully organized. You can jump through the screen to look at what you need. If you're looking for receptive language or pragmatic language, or even AAC sources that are in Boom cards. So this link is also in the resources that I'm sharing today. So I'm going to just jump in about speech practice and home practice. I was a person who was married to my speech book. Speech books for every student. We worked on them every session. We take pages home from them. Again, trying to be paperless, I was fortunate in that several of my schools used the Google Classroom platform. So I was then permitted to have an email address on the platform, and I was able to send home my practice calendars, my worksheets. Boom, even for a non-paid account, has a fast play link that is live for 14 days that does not require a sign-in. So you can create a link to an activity and send it to your students. I was able to post those in Google Classroom. And again, not to go too far down the rabbit hole with Google Classroom, but if you've used it, you may see that the stream can become very cluttered with the assignments that you've posted. A colleague shared a wonderful tip with me to create each of your students as a topic, and that's what you see blacked out here on my screen. So each of my students is a topic, and then I post the assignment directly to the topic so I can see a clean sort of who received what. So trying to refine that even further, this month I trialed a Bitmoji page link for my speech home practice. And what I was able to do under the icons is compile the links that I would send to students. So here are my articulation and language calendars. I was able to offer them even more. Here is a website where they can go to find pictures of sounds sorted by position. For my older students, I like them to work from a thematic word list for the season. So those are all posted, as well as some digital activities. So what this has enabled me to do is basically use one link. I still personalize and tell the student or the parent where to go look for the item or what I want them to work on. But this has saved me some posting of links by doing the Bitmoji homework page. I also organized my reinforcement. So here's a collection of some things that I use. As I said, I'm using boom cards. I love online building sites. Yes, there's a potato head, but there is a female version too. I use static trackboards and digital dice and spinners. My students love this image reveal tool as a reinforcement option, where I'm hoping to be able to show you that, where you can remove a frame at a time of a picture that you've uploaded for some fun. I use my standard cover-up pages, and I'm able to recreate the bingo chips by using the annotation feature on Zoom, simply drawing a little shape on them. And I love to use the digital marble jar. So step 3, so far we've talked about technology, we've talked about changing your materials, but this was the game changer for me, and it was being able to screen share my lesson and my reinforcement side by side. So from the top, what you need to do is open that Zoom meeting on your device 1, and then you join the meeting on device 2 that's located near your student. You might need to turn off audio to avoid the feedback. I've used headphones. My students at home have used headphones. But this third step then is to share your screen as a split screen. And so how do you do that? Well, you open both your stimulus material and your reinforcement activity, whether it's PDF, Word, or PowerPoint. You open them at the same time, and then you hover at the top of the screen, and you right-click and swipe left or swipe right, and it automatically sizes it to half screen. If you are using a website, you can just minimize it in the upper corner. Now, my caveat is that I'm a Windows environment, so I'm able to explain this for the Windows environment, but I am not familiar with Mac. I did some quick Googling, and it appears that you also can split your screen without the addition of some other technology. So that should be helpful. You may need to look for that on your own. I was figuring this out in August, but in October of 2020, this wonderful speech blogger did an entire post on how to split your screen in teletherapy. I do have her link for you also in the resources, and I will pull up that site. She had some interesting techniques and fun things to do for students who are older. I see students K through 6, not as many middle schoolers, and there's some great suggestions there. So let's take a look at how this works. And here's where the tricky part is. We're finding in Zoom that I'm not able to share my complete desktop today. So I can't maneuver very easily between all of the things I wanted to show you, but I'm going to give it a shot, and I'm going to do a new share for everything I would like to show you. So the first thing is an example of how to do that split technology. So here I would hover my cursor in the top of the screen, right click, and simply swipe to the left, and then automatically all of your screens will show other selections you can make. And sometimes you might need to just hover your arrow and drag down at the bottom. But let's see if it allows me. And it is, yay, to share a type of reinforcement that I use side by side with my stimulus material. This is, and I'm moving you all around my screen here. So in this case, I would roll a die, and this would allow me to add chocolates to the students' box. I love the Tech and Talk SLP activities. They are free on Teachers Pay Teachers, and they have a theme, basically for every month. And I wanted to show you, let's see if it'll allow me to show you another one of them. This is one I used recently. This is the most of the way that they're formatted, that there are 5 thematic items, and you need to click the item and go in search of, in this case, the pot of gold. And my students love playing against each other. They love playing against me. I give them 3 tries to find it. And if they don't find the item by that time, then I am the winner of that point. So they love these items. Another thing that I use is sometimes simply just a plain PDF. I'll choose a cute scene and add a picture to it, and then treat that item like a sticker, roll a die, copy it, and just place some more stickers on the page for the student. Move them around. Some other examples of PowerPoints that I use. Here's an example of a PDF game board that I used, and I used the snipping tool. And again, I'm not sure you can see it on my screen, but if you search in your device search bar, you might have the utility for a snipping tool. I don't know if it's allowing me to show you, but you simply snip a portion of the item and then paste it into another location, another PowerPoint. And this one, to make it interactive, I was able to load a photo that I found online that looked like a game piece. So we can roll a die and actually play this as a game as we're working on our activity. And also a little tip, maybe you all know this as well, but you can select color and it will give you a variety of other colors, so you don't have to search for a red game piece and a blue game piece. You can simply copy the color and use that. A couple of other examples of fun PowerPoints. We're adapting a PowerPoint. This is one I adapted recently, a bingo game. I inserted a shape and kept it transparent, so we could even use this as a bingo activity. Sometimes you simply have to share your screen in a larger screen size. I'm going to continue to try to share, not moving so easily around my desktop. Okay. This is another example of a PowerPoint that I adapted to be interactive. This was a static PDF page. A little tip is that you can turn on your clipboard. So when you're using that snipping tool, I snipped each of these pictures and was able to load them individually then, load them all at one time onto the PowerPoint. But then this allows me to move the pieces, so we were able to do this as a pronoun activity. We worked on subjective pronouns and objective pronouns and asked, who has the item once we move them around the screen. I'm going to share another type of stimulus. So I put up my pictures on the side of the screen. And I wanted to show you some websites that I use. I mentioned, I hope that you're seeing these side by side. I mean, maybe there's a chance that you are, but that's what was giving me the bugaboo in Zoom. I was not able to share my entire desktop and move through them freely. So perhaps they're painting, but again, the beautiful thing is to be able to share these at the same time. I told you that my students love the image reveal tool, so I've uploaded a picture. Sometimes I roll a die and allow them to reveal that number of frames. But the best thing about this one is that we can work on our activity and then we can do a reveal. I'll give them about 6 shapes at one time, stop it. It fosters a great amount of language. We can make predictions, do descriptions about what they're seeing in the frames. And then when you run out of time at the end of your session, the beautiful thing is you just simply let it reveal itself. The kids seem to love pictures about animals and about sports. And of course, we can talk about perspective taking here because we're all wondering, or would all like to say in our speech bubble, what this dog was thinking about. My screen should have switched to a Boom activity for you now, fingers crossed. Boom has a lot of open-ended reinforcers that you can use. So here's the candy pizza that my students love using. They get to tell me where to put the items on the page. Sometimes I'll even draw a line with the annotation tools down that item. Now my kids, and I'm not sure you can see these, they love to use Spot It cards as a reinforcement activity. And if you've never used Spot It, there's some mathematical wonder that between any 2 cards, photos or pictures are only repeated one time. And my kids love to do this as a competition. And I really missed doing that with the paper. So I was really excited when I found an OT who had done a bit of a copycat on the Spot cards and called it Spot the Game. So now as a reinforcer, we can play Spot It like we used to with paper. I mentioned the marble jar that I like to use. And again, I'm hoping that the desktop is switching for you, but I'm placing marbles in the digital jar. We choose a color and we have a contest. I really love the ABC games. The food games are great. Here again, the students have to use descriptive language to tell me what kind of cupcake they want, and then use descriptive language to tell me what color they want it to be iced, what kind of decorations they would like on them, all using descriptive language. And similarly, I love the building games. This is the jack-o'-lantern one. They have to use language to tell me the shape, as well as describe what kind of features or eyes or fun things they want. They actually have to tell me where to place them on the item using directional language. And sometimes I like to foil them, so they have to use language to tell me how to fix it. And at this point, you're thinking, yes, your kids are in front of the screen a lot. And while it's true, we're paperless and we are not using manipulatives, I am using every opportunity to keep my students moving. Following directions activities, I use a lot of following body part movement direction activities. I have a stack of cards when we work on articulation activities to build that speed and automaticity. If they're working on sentences or words, they have to do a motion alongside some cute little cards. They might have to use a crocodile mouth or a cowboy lasso or a backstroke in tandem with doing the practice. So we are trying to keep moving. I wanted to show you the website of the blogger who did the split screen technology. And I'm hoping someone will shout out if you're not seeing this particular screen, but you can watch the video. And here's an example where you're seeing her materials side by side. She's using her own materials in a trackboard. But I loved some of the ideas that she had later on in the blog post, using some emotion activity, side by side with another activity. Here she's using an online wacky web tales generator to use articulation words and parts of speech to create a Mad Lib type activity. Here, an online read aloud story through YouTube that is being paused, and then a companion activity in the PDF being done. Using videos. Here are Ellen's YouTube videos with a prediction activity for a pragmatic language activity. And this is a great idea, using virtual field trips or webcams. Here's the actual site, and she has a reading activity beside it. So I'm going to try to resume sharing my PowerPoint and resume it. So you're probably wondering what my students have thought about all of this. Well, I was wondering too. And so as a part of a differentiated supervision activity, I decided to poll them. And I presented them with this visual rating scale. I was a constant because I had served some of those schools last year. So I was able to ask them to think about how we were doing speech and to tell me what they liked, which way they liked. Did they like doing speech the way we did it last year with board games and workbooks, or did they prefer doing speech as we did it this year with computer activities and items on the computer? I didn't want to have a forced choice, so I actually did give them an option to tell me, did they like doing both about the same? So that was the middle one. And here's how that data looked. The blue area are the students who preferred doing speech the way we had previously done it. The pink area are the students who said, I like it the way we did it last year, and I like it the way we're doing it this year. And the green area are students who preferred doing speech the digital way. And so thinking about student engagement and how they viewed this as favorable or unfavorable, I considered the students who liked therapy both ways and the students who liked the way we were doing therapy this year as at least perceiving it as favorable or as engaging as we had done it the previous year. And that's what's represented in this rectangular box. So here are the resources that I've talked about today, the free items. I do have them, a little image of them that you will see disappeared in your handout, again, for copyright protection. But you'll notice those two website links, both the, the one where the blogger is demonstrating how to split your screen and those activity ideas, as well as the link that had the 917 free speech therapy boom cards. So just a couple of closing thoughts. What started out as being a survival skill type of way of doing therapy quickly became, you know, my way of life speech therapy. And I really do like it. And even once I'm allowed to relax restrictions and return to normal speech therapy, I will continue to do a lot of the things I'm currently doing for the benefits. I'm able to carry fewer materials from place to place. I'm able to accomplish more of my students' goals in a session because I can flip so easily between my materials now, all at my fingertips. And I think the students are engaged, and there's more control in some of my situations. I love working with games, but sometimes we lose a lot of time with them, or my dice are flying around the room despite my trick of having throwing the dice in the box and not just doing it on the table. But that said, if you elect to try this, I would just invite you to be very kind to yourself. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it took me a bit of time to migrate my materials over to a digital format. And just like regular therapy goes swimmingly most of the time, we all have those sessions that do not go so well, or an activity that did not fly the way we thought it was going to. And that happens in this framework as well. So I'm going to stop and ask Elizabeth to share if there are any questions, but before even doing that, I did want to point out that my email address is on the first page of the presentation. If you have a question after today, or as you go to implement something like this, please feel free to reach out. If I can answer or be of help in any way, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Please post your questions in the chat window. We do have a few at this time, but we will take more as they come in. As we're waiting for a few more to come in, a few questions that came in about recording. We are recording this, so if you want to go back and see it again or something spark your interest, it will be posted in the Schoology in approximately a week. We have to make it accessible and then it will be up. So the first question is, can you speak as much as you can to confidentiality in Google Classroom with the names of students and any ways that you may have protected that confidentiality?
That's a great question. So my understanding is that in a regular classroom, when students see assignments, they're seeing everyone in their class. So I don't believe in, what I have is a Google Classroom for each school, and I have an invitation to each student, and I'm posting, and I created a topic with each student's name. So I am individually posting to each of those topics. So my student A cannot see the topic that was posted to student B if they're not posted under that topic. So that is some degree of confidentiality. Often, I would say half of my students signed up for the Google Classroom feature. The other half was an email. So I'm very easily able to protect student confidentiality by blind carbon copying the emails. But to my understanding, when I'm posting in Google Classroom under a topic only, those posts, assignments are not visible between student and student, since I'm keeping them all an individual topic.
Thank you. Next question for you is, were the students able to move the game pieces, or were you controlling the movement? Can you speak a little bit to that?
That's a great question. And that was on a few bases, a student by student basis, as well as my students who were remote from home. When I am remote and students are in that brick and mortar private school where they were not allowing services to come in, they're using iPads that never worked successfully for them to try to move the pieces. For my remote students at home, they sometimes were able to use control. I had a couple that were really super savvy, and I felt comfortable giving them control to move the game pieces. There were some students that could not manage the fine motor to do it, and then I controlled the game pieces. For my in-person sessions, again, they have the iPad, my iPad next to them, and it's just not as successful with that remote control. So I am doing that coordination of the game pieces. So yeah, that is me. But I don't have to do that with the image reveals or the tech and talk activities, and they absolutely love them. They just love a contest, whether they're moving something or I'm moving something. But that's a really good question.
Yeah, and that made me chuckle thinking of students that we've all worked with. They love a good contest, right? So anything like that works wonderfully. The next question is, can you speak a little bit to your differential about when you may use this digital approach in the future when we go back to quote unquote typical therapy, and when you may not?
So I really hope to continue using digital materials. I really like moving between items with a lot of facility. So my hope is to be, closer positioned to my students, but to continue to broadcast my materials digitally. And then I won't have to use, I will continue to use digital reinforcement too, but not all the time. I will return to some manipulatives and hands-on activities and coloring every now and then. But I mean, I really have just accomplished so much more by keeping things digital. And as I said, trying to keep them engaged with more movement and incorporating movement, not necessarily moving game pieces. So my hope is to continue using my materials digitally and broadcasting them so they can see them, and to continue providing speech home practice in some sort of digital format, whether I continue with the Bitmoji classroom or simply just become more efficient at emailing my homework. I don't have to worry about the speech book coming back, it being lost, the paper being crumpled that ends up in the backpack. So those are the elements that I will continue.
I'm sure your families will like that as well. That whole trying to read the crumpled piece of paper information is always difficult.
Or it's in there for the month of, it's a month late. So the practice calendar for March ends up being found in April or May.
Absolutely. So somebody had mentioned screen split is a great idea, especially when you have groups of 2 or 3 and they're working on different goals. Could you speak to multiple screen splits or the possibility of that and how you manage that crowd?
So I have really had about max 2 students this year, and many of my students I'm trying to see individually in shortened sessions. But the way I solve that problem is if I have 2 students, I put their stimulus materials in the split screen. So I've been known to, that digital manual that I have, I just make a copy of it. So I can pull up the page of ours and pull up the page of S's. So each of them has their stimulus material in view. And then I just change screen to put the reinforcement activity up full screen, and we'll do that for a couple of turns before we return. And that's great for a language activity too. If I'm using a pronoun activity for one student and a preposition activity for another, I'm just using the split screen with both pieces of the stimulus materials and not reinforcement material. I can't speak to how you could split it 3 ways, but I can at least accomplish 2.
That's awesome. Thank you. And then, and the asker says thank you as well. Can you speak to, and depending on your caseload, can you speak to how you've used these resources with students who may have more complex needs, behavior, attention, cognitive difficulties?
Yes. So on my caseload, I don't have any students with complex communication needs. No one is using a device. But my colleagues have been very creative with doing some screen items, particularly when they were remote. We use a lot of Loom videos to, when remote and asynchronous, our therapists actually recorded their entire session, pausing for interaction from the student. I had seen creative uses of using that snip tool to screenshot a student's communication board and then place it side by side and use the annotation features to highlight or use guided language on a board. Behaviorally, my reinforcement activities have been working for those students that are a little, harder to engage. And maybe it's because those were the students who answered that they liked the digital activities. They're just those screen kids who, who enjoy watching something happen on the screen that I'm making happen or moving things around. I've used the commercial games as well, the snakes and ladders, or those that are, really, really stimulating, that hold their attention. You can place your token boards as one of your screen shares in the split screen. So you could actually be, physically moving tokens for a preferred activity for your first then activity, or to show that they are achieving those tallies before getting their reinforcement break. I hope that's helpful. It's true that I don't have severe complex needs on my caseload at this time.
Thank you. And just a shameless plug on that part. If you're part of our open forum, Tara McCarthy, who did our This Is How I Do It last session, is coming back to our open forum to talk about children with augmentative communication needs and utilizing Zoom in that format. So please stop by if that is your section. And Tammy Thompson Cook did a wonderful presentation over the summer that is on our Schoology as well, that also highlights AAC in the virtual environment. So just a shameless plug. Sorry about that.
Not at all. I would say I also recently saw a post about for a complex needs student, placing all of your materials and links into one Google slide presentation that then you can just move from page to page, and it more easily facilitates grabbing those links if you want to show a video or access different types of media. Place them all in a slide, including their communication board, and move easily between the slides as opposed to on your desktop moving between them.
Yes, thank you. We had a person come to one of our open forums who was doing that and demonstrated that, and it seems to be working very well for her in her environment. So I'm glad you mentioned that. We are at the wrap up point. I really appreciate you hanging in with the tech difficulties. It didn't seem like it at all. So thank you. It was great. And a couple of those tips that you gave, the patent staff will work on a real quick video on how to use a snip tool and things like that. So we can pop that in to the Schoology account. We do really appreciate your time today. You gave us such great resources.
I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to share, and that I wish everyone a lot of luck as you navigate the remainder of your school year in all of your environments. So thank you.